Still on the same track? What are we thinking?
A whole lot has changed except for the intensity of it at this point. It continues to really strengthen. We now have a Category 2 hurricane, 100-mile-per-hour sustained winds, gusting over 100 miles per hour. It's still moving northwest at 16, so the speed hasn't really changed all that much. And boy, I tell you what, if you were watching us at 4 a.m. this morning, the presentation of this thing just continues to ramp up, and that is a full-blown hurricane that is developing an eye now. Let's go closer in here on what we're looking at with the eye that has really come together. And you know, when you get an eye like this, it's a sign that it is going to continue to strengthen. It's got the warm waters, check that box off. It's got low wind shear, check that box off. There's not a whole lot of dry air. It's likely going to continue to strengthen. It's sitting about 290 miles southeast of the mouth of the river, and notice pressure is down to 976. So the pressure has dropped, and that's a sign that yes, it is strengthening. All right, this is the 10 a.m. track. Remember, we don't get a track update every single advisory. We got a 10 a.m. track. Our next one will be at 4 p.m. Of course, we'll have that for you live here. This was as of 10 a.m. though, continuing to strengthen. Major hurricane. This will be a major hurricane later today. Category 4 off the coast of Louisiana by tomorrow morning. Conditions will start to go downhill tomorrow morning along the coast, and then landfall is still expected tomorrow afternoon, getting into the evening hours. I think we've sped up the landfall just a little bit, maybe closer to 4, 5, 6 o'clock rather than 7, 8 o'clock. So a little bit sooner. And there it is, 130-mile-per-hour hurricane making landfall. It still includes Vermilion Bay, Tahoma, Terrebonne Parish, to Lafourche Parish, to Lower Jefferson, and right on the edge of Plaquemine. So there's still some uncertainty on exactly where that landfall is going to be. But if you watch us, and if you've been watching us the past couple of days, it has basically stayed consistent with somewhere near the Terrebonne Parish area, give or take 10 miles. It's been fluctuating a little bit, but that's to be expected. And, you know, at this point, we can't guarantee that it's going to take that direct path. It may take more of this easterly path. That would not be good for us. It may take more of this westerly path. That would still leave us on the wet side, the dirty side of this storm, but perhaps taking the strongest winds just off to the west. It's hard to say at this point, and there's really no guarantee on either one of those three scenarios. They could all simply happen at this point. I do want to talk about something else, the speed of this thing. Now, it's going to slow down on late Sunday into Monday as it approaches the coastline. It's going to start to make that turn. It's going to slow down a little bit. It's not going to stall, but it's going to slow down as it makes a turn. And notice from about 7 p.m. Sunday evening to 7 p.m. Monday evening, it's going to travel from our coast up to Jackson. So it's going to be moving, but not going to be moving terribly fast. This is not a Zeta storm. Remember Zeta in October? It flew on through. This is not going to be that. This is going to be more of your classic August hurricane that blows on in. And yes, most of these impacts are going to be starting Saturday afternoon through, or excuse me, Sunday afternoon through Sunday night. So a lot of people are going to be dealing with the worst weather when it's dark. Now, one of the big concerns is the storm surge, and we are still keeping the same values here. I just checked with the National Hurricane Center. We're going to hold it at 10 to 15 feet of storm surge for portions of Terrebonne Parish, Lafourche Parish, Lower Jefferson, creeping up into St. Charles Parish, 10 to 15 feet. And then that's on the west bank of Plaquemines. Once you get on the east bank of Plaquemines, you got to remember we're going to have this funneling effect because the winds are going to be blowing into the center here. So you've got winds funneling into here. We're going to still have significant storm surge well east of that center. So 7 to 11 feet for eastern St. Bernard outside the levees, east bank of Plaquemines 7 to 11, and then outside the levee protection system in Orleans Parish, Venetian Isles, will have 7 to 11 feet of storm surge as well. 7 to 11 feet Hancock County. That's over Highway 90 to give it perspective. Same thing for Harrison County. This is going to inundate a lot of the coastal areas there right along the beachfront and creeping up past Highway 90 in a lot of spots. 4 to 7 feet for the lake. I think the most significant storm surge in the lake with this track, and you can see the white line is the current forecast, we will see a funneling of air going from the east to the west. So that means St. John and southern Tangi could see the most significant water rise. And of course, right there, once you start to enter Lake Pontchartrain near the Wrigley's, that's where we could see some significant water rise as well. High tide is going to generally be Sunday night into Monday morning, give or take. It just depends on where you're at on the coast. But high tide is going to kind of correspond as the storm moves on in. So that only kind of adds to our concern for storm surge as this moves into southeast Louisiana. All right, we're worried about the storm surge. We're also worried about the heavy rainfall. I said it's going to slow down a little bit. It's not going to stall, but it could be over our area for about 24 hours, and that's going to be enough to where we start to see some rain totals really add up here. We're talking about totals perhaps over 15 inches. I think we're going to see more on average about probably 6 to 10 inches, but there's going to be a few spots. If you get a band setting up over you, it's going to dump a lot of rainfall. It can happen very quickly, and that will lead to not only street flooding, but also maybe river flooding. We're going to have to watch our rivers on the North Shore. Something else that only makes it more difficult for the rivers are the lakes, Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Maurepas. They're going to be running higher. The rivers are not going to be able to drain into those lakes as that storm surge pushes up on those rivers. So they're not going to be able to drain. That means if you live along a river on the North Shore, you need to be planning for worst case scenario just in case we do see significant flooding. It might not happen, but it might, and you've got to prepare for worst case scenario in these situations. So that's what we're looking at with the heavy rainfall threat. And of course, as you get further and further away from the center, our rain totals will be lower. And as you get west of the center, rain totals will drop off dramatically very quickly. That's with that current forecast and the line you can see there right now. Another thing we're really concerned about here, usually we're only, I don't say only, but usually we don't focus so much on the winds. But when you start getting a major hurricane, Cat 3, Cat 4, you're talking about some extremely destructive winds that can destroy, property. You cannot be in a camper, you cannot be in an RV, you've got to be in a well-foundation home if you live down in the bayou parishes, but of course, we have mandatory evacuation, so I hope you're not staying. Maximum wind forecast. These are what the maximum winds could be. It doesn't mean it's going to blow this hard the entire time, but to give you a perspective on how bad it could get, this is what we're going with. 140 mile per hour plus near the coast. If this thing decides it wants to strengthen a little bit more, you might have a wind gust 140, 150 miles an hour. That is within possibilities for a Category 4 storm. Now, that's going to be down towards the coast. Port Fourchon, Cocodrie, Chauvin, even down towards Grand Isles on that iffy zone of you could see some pretty significant winds. Now, as you go inland, Houma, Thibodaux, Morgan City, getting up to even the river parishes here, there's Reserve, there's St. James, there's St. John, up towards Ascension Parish and then Baton Rouge, you could very well see wind gusts 100 miles per hour or greater. That can cause damage. You can guarantee there's going to be a tremendous amount of power outages with winds like that. Now, as you get closer to New Orleans, there's still some question on how strong the winds are going to get in New Orleans, and it all has to do with that track. These winds are based on the track tracking through Terrebonne Parish up through Baton Rouge. Now, if this track ends up shifting to the east any, and I mean it could shift by 20, 50 miles. That means that corridor of the most intense winds in the white here, you can imagine, just pick it up and move it over to the east a little bit along with the track. So we would see a more significant wind threat if that track decides it wants to come in towards Port Fourchon. If it wants to come in towards Grand Isle, that would be a bad scenario for New Orleans with regard to the extreme wind threat. So that's why we're not out of the woods. While the track is to our west, that is a trend we're going to be watching up until this thing makes landfall. So that line right there, is it a guarantee it goes right along that line? No, and it probably won't. I mean, it could go either side of it. And this thing could still go to the west a little bit. Vermilion Bay, Marsh Island here, there's Lafayette. They could very well see the center track more like this. Maybe it swings out a little bit further. Not a big distance, but it could make a difference on the impacts with winds. It would take those strongest winds and push them a little further towards the west there. So there's about 3 different scenarios we could look at. The one we got right now, maybe a little further east, that would bring more significance to New Orleans and the North Shore. And then we got a track that shifts a little further west. That would take those strongest winds towards Lafayette. Anyway, you slice this, river parishes, bayou parishes, it looks like you're going to get the brunt of this storm. So I hope you're heeding those evacuation warnings or mandatory evacuations and getting out, because we are worried not only about storm surge, but these intense winds. Now, looking at our models here, our models have just been doing a wonderful job. These have not changed, it seems like, in days. We haven't really seen any huge fluctuations in the track. It's for the past 24 hours. I mean, it has been dead set on southeast Louisiana here, and perhaps as we go into south central Louisiana. There is still some uncertainty. There's always going to be uncertainty with a system moving in and making landfall. But when they're that tightly clustered, this thing's coming to Louisiana. There's no doubt about it. This thing is not going to be able to curve up to Pensacola. It's not going to the Florida Panhandle. There's big high pressure over the Carolinas, and that's a big wall in front of this thing. The high pressure is actually going to get a little bit stronger as this blows on in. And so that's why we're almost certain that it is coming to Louisiana. There's no doubt about it. And then you can see the curve up to the north there. These are all within the cone, of course, but there you can see tightly clustered from Houma to Baton Rouge. But what does that do? It leaves all of southeast Louisiana and South Mississippi on the east side, the dirty side of the storm. So I don't, see any scenario where we don't see an impact from Hurricane Ida, which is forecasted to be a Cat 4. So there it is. And let me tell you, it's taken advantage of that loop current this afternoon as it runs right over the hottest part of the Gulf of Mexico. And when you're talking about a loop current here, it's warm water that goes pretty deep. So it's an abundant, almost limitless supply of warm fuel for this thing. Now, if the sea surface temperatures are only warm at the top of the water, sometimes it can upwell and pull up some cooler water. That's not going to happen here. This is too deep of warm water. It's running over that. It's rapidly intensifying. And then as it gets up towards the coast, that's why we have it as a Category 4.